this Romania thing is a really good inroads to a lot of other issues. And a lot of people don't understand when I say Soros is NATO, NATO is Soros. Finkel is Einhorn, Einhorn is Finkel. It's the same thing, right? Picture of NATO, picture of Soros. Corporate wants you to tell the difference between these two pictures. It's the same picture. It's a really important point. And it helps understand the Democrat Party and their Soros funding. It helps understand the paramilitary role of street protests and riots. And it helps understand what Soros has been doing for the past 45 years in a context that goes way beyond the ideological. It gets down to the moolah. We covered something last stream, and I need to clip this. I just don't have time to freaking clip it. Remember, like last stream, we covered this Harvard Boys Do Russia, and we went over the Harvard Institute for International Development. And remember how USA deputized Harvard to carve up Russia and gave Harvard hundreds of millions of dollars to do it. And on top of that, Harvard also got an inside investment on all these state assets being sold off in closed auctions. The Harvard Endowment and George Soros. Were the only foreign entities allowed to participate in the auction. And that wasn't just Harvard in the 1990s. That's everywhere. That's Hungary after the revolution in the 80s. That's Poland. That's Yugoslavia, Serbia, Kosovo, Albania. It's North Macedonia. It's Georgia. It's Ukraine. It's the same business model. It's a business model. It's Soros Inc. Okay?
Perfection is perfected, so I'm a lad, I'm understanding. This and it's like that, and like this, and like that, and like this, and like that, and it's like this. We ain't got no love for love. So just chill till the next episode. Falling back on that ass, what a hellified gangster lane. Getting funky on the mic like an old batch of collard greens. It's the capital S-O-S suppression, double O-P, D-O-double-G-Y-D-O-double-G, you see. Showing much flex when it's time to wreck a mic. Pippin' hoes and clacking a grip like my name was Dolomite. Yeah, and it don't quit. I think they in the mood for another one of those G hits. So Trey, what up, dog? Gotta give them what they want. What's that, shit? We gotta break them off something. Hell yeah. And it's gotta be bumpin'. City of Compton. It's where it takes place, so what national attention.
So, Soros is a businessman, not a philanthropist. He's a donor drafter. He donates to politicians. He co-donates with USAID, with NED, with NATO grant-making bodies, with EU grant-making bodies. And then he gets first access investment through his investment funds in the regions and industries that the War Department, that NATO, that the CIA, that the State Department, that USAID, that NED, that the military, the intelligence, the diplomats, and the stakeholders are all rushing into, and he gets first pass at the investments. That's Soros' philosophy of, quote, staying ahead of the curve, his book. One of his dozen or whatever. Soros in 96 here. Look at this dude. Just chilling. Chilling like a villain. So when you see Soros funding all these organs around the Romanian court to cancel the election because NATO wants that air base, wants that NATO base there. NATO wants the Romania as a base of operations, as a NATO base of operations in the Black Sea against Russia. And you see Soros carrying out the civil society element of the NATO plan. That's the same shit Soros has been doing for 45 years. This is from 2001, I think. NATO meeting with George Soros. George Soros going to NATO HQ for a joint collaboration between NATO and Soros, for Soros to set up his civil society, rent-a-riot mobs, and bribery juice money to the judiciaries in southeastern Europe, right where Romania is. Okay. Been going on a long time. George Soros wrote this short book in 1993, Toward a New World Order, The Future of NATO, by George Soros. I'd like to read that today, actually. I'm going to play a little bit more chess, and then maybe we'll just read this little booklet from 1993. Pounds of hash in the stash. I wait for her to make some quick cash. I told her she could be lieutenant, bitch got gas at last. I'm literally lounging black, sitting back, counting double-digit thousand stacks. Had to re-up, see what's up with my peeps. Toyota dealer dawn had it cheap. Should NATO expand? Council on Foreign Relations Task Force, 1995. There's a million of these. I want to get to all of it on Wednesday's stream. He is a stylish dude. I mean, you gotta admit, he does it in style. In a perverted way, it is the American dream, what Soros did. Immigrant comes over, gets a job on Wall Street, works his way up, attaches his business to American statecraft, just like Sam Zamuri, Sam the Banana Man. He's like the financial instrument equivalent of Sam Zamuri in the Banana Wars. Soros, staying ahead of the curve. Kind of easy when you're in bed with the CIA and NATO. You know what they're going to do next. That's one way to stay ahead of the curve. Just have a national security clearance and invest in the thing the Pentagon is about to go to war for. 1993. George Soros, The Future of NATO. As it is, the UN, as the United Nations, has already failed as an institution which can be put in charge of U.S. troops. This leaves NATO as the only institution of collective security that has not failed, because it has not been tried. NATO has the potential of serving as the basis of a new world order. NATO as the basis of the new world order in 1993. Remember, this is 2 years before NATO would fire its first bullet in 1995 against Yugoslavia. And notice how Soros is complaining. The very first thing he complains about is Yugoslavia. 2 years later, NATO, the basis of the New World Order, would fire its first bullet. Formed in 1949, wouldn't fire a single bullet until 1995. Soros is calling for it right before it does it. But NATO can only serve as the basis of a New World Order if its mission is redefined. There's an urgent need for profound new thinking with regard to NATO. The future of NATO. The original mission was to defend the free world against the Soviet Empire. That mission is obsolete. But the collapse of the Soviet Empire has left a security vacuum, which has the potential of turning into a black hole. This presents a different kind of threat than the Soviet Empire did. There's no direct threat from the region to NATO countries. The danger is within the region. He's saying NATO used to face outside of Europe. But now NATO has to be used on Europe, which they would do in Yugoslavia. Same thing with the NGOs, the State Department USAID funded NGOs. They were supposed to do strategic influence against authoritarian on the outside. But when Trump won, there was an urgent need for profound new thinking with the role of the NGOs, the State Department, the Pentagon, the IC, the democracy NGOs. The danger was not from without, it was within. Isn't that nasty? Therefore, if NATO has any mission at all, it is to project its power and influence into the region. And the mission is best defined in terms of open and closed societies, democracy and autocracy. Closed societies based on the nationalist principles. So nationalism is the enemy. NATO has to be used to stop nationalism. He's calling for NATO to be used on NATO countries, which of course it is. It was during the 1940s. This was Operation Gladio and all that. Political engineering. But the threat is very different in character from the one NATO was constructed to confront. NATO has to get involved in organized political warfare, which it was doing for the 40 years before that. But sidebar. It involves the building of democratic states and open societies, embedding them in a structure which precludes certain kinds of behavior, like voting for Georgescu in Romania. Only in the case of failure does the prospect of military intervention arise. Unfortunately, the American proposal for the forthcoming NATO summit does not deal with this issue at all. It's a very narrow technical proposal. The scope of possible future cooperation is described as peacekeeping, crisis management, search and rescue missions, and disaster relief. The primary need is for constructive engagement in the transition to democratic, market-oriented, open societies. This is where you get the George Soros, Milton Friedman alliance. Who's best poised to take advantage of the market-oriented open societies? It's the big multinational corporations, and it's the private equity firms and hedge funds that are all going to be buying up those markets. Pizza Hut nationalism, huh? This requires an association or alliance which goes far beyond military matters. It contains a significant element of economic assistance. Both the military and economic aspects have to relate to internal political developments within states, as much as relationships between states. Because we need to do this transition to prying open their markets. So he's saying NATO has to get involved in the internal politics of every country. Exactly what we see today. Not just states between states, but for example, in Romania, NATO has to get involved in the internal political developments within Romania. Yeah, whole society, exactly. The mission of this new kind of alliance is so radically different from the original mission of NATO that it cannot be entrusted to NATO itself. This is like organized political warfare. George Kennan saying, listen, this is a State Department thing, but the State Department shouldn't be running it itself. If it were, it would change NATO out of all recognition. A different kind of organization is needed. The proposed partnership for peace could be that organization. It must lay the emphasis on the political and economic aspects. The Partnership for Peace must have a structure and a budget. That is what NATO could bring to the table. NATO is a unified command structure which brings together the US and Western Europe. There are great advantages in having a strong Western pillar. It leads to a lopsided structure firmly rooted in the West. This is as it should be, since the goal is to reinforce and gratify the desire of a region for joining the open society of the West. It would be an express condition of any membership in the Partnership for Peace that NATO is free to invite any other country to join NATO. The budget of the Partnership for Peace must come out of the NATO budget. There may be some elements in the military-industrial complex that may object to such a reallocation of resources. George Soros, in 1993, complaining about the military-industrial complex. Because Raytheon and Boeing and Lockheed Martin may object to the money buying politicians rather than their missiles and tanks. They have a strong argument in their favor. If nothing is done on the economic and political front, defense budgets will have to be raised. The Yugoslav experience, this is 2 years before we fired bullets at Yugoslavia. Economic aid, but economic aid costs money, and the money can be found only in defense budgets and U.S. aid. It leaves Japan out of the account. Japan should be asked to join NATO. This is what Soros was saying in 1993. Japan should join the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Is Japan the single farthest point on the globe from the Atlantic Ocean? It might be. Is there any country farther from the Atlantic Ocean than Japan? I'm telling you, NATO is going to expand to the moon. If Elon does get us to Mars, there will be NATO bases, North Atlantic Ocean bases on the surface of Mars. The architecture for a new world order, the most important one is NATO. Soros considers NATO the most important structure in the New World Order. The combination of manpower from Eastern Europe with the technical capabilities of NATO would greatly enhance the military potential of the partnership because it would reduce the risk of body bags for NATO countries. Because then the body bags are coming from Eastern Europe and like Romania and Ukraine. Ouch. That hurts. This is the that meme that Elon posted of the old men playing chess while the young men die on the chessboard. NATO offers a better culture than the European Commission, which has been in charge of coordinating economic assistance. The Marshall Plan. Countries like Hungary have almost completely broken their dependence on the Soviet market. They need better access to European markets more than any form of economic assistance. This is the basis of the EU. And look at his obsession, George Soros, even in the 1990s, of marrying rule of law programs to economic aid. The same thing USAID does. Rule of law programs to control laws in foreign countries. To create a state of law, a legal framework, there can be no economic development. The know-how should be supplied by the private sector. The role of foreign aid is to provide an inducement. George Soros, in 1993, the role of foreign aid is to provide an inducement for the development of a legal framework and for the private sector to participate. So basically his portfolio companies. I think this is an